My cop daughter-in-law didn't recognize me when she pulled me over, but then I accidentally handed her my late husband's military ID. She froze. Her hands started shaking and she whispered, "Mom, you need to follow me." I had no idea that one old ID would expose the $162,000 betrayal that had been destroying my family in secret. Now let me tell you something, and I want you to sit with me a minute, because this one still gets my hands shaking a little when I think about it. Even now, even after everything worked out the way it did, I'm 74 years old. I've buried a husband. I've raised a son who thinks he knows everything, and I've driven that same stretch of desert road between Pale Rock Crossing and the highway more times than I can count on both hands and both feet put together. But I never in my life thought that road would be the place where my whole family nearly came apart and then came back together all in the same afternoon. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are when I drive into town for my groceries and to visit Walter's grave. That's my late husband. God rest him, 31 years, in the Army before he passed 6 years back. And I always take the old desert route because the highway gives me a headache with all that traffic and honking. The desert road is quiet, just red dirt and scrub brush and heat shimmering up off the asphalt, like the whole world's breathing slow. I like it that way. I've had enough noise in my life. So there I am, driving my old Buick, windows cracked because the air conditioning's been temperamental since March, radio playing something soft, and I see the lights come up behind me, red and blue, flashing in my rearview mirror, cutting through that dust-colored afternoon like a knife through butter. Now, I want you to understand, I have never in 74 years been pulled over. Not once. I raised my son to respect the law, and I lived by it myself every single day. So my heart did jump a little, I won't lie to you. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the car in park, and I sat there with my hands on the wheel like they teach you, waiting. I watched in the mirror as the officer stepped out of the cruiser, tall, straight-backed, that crisp uniform, sunglasses on despite the sun, already dipping low enough that most folks would have taken theirs off. She walked up slow, hand resting near her belt, out of habit, I suppose, the way they train them to do. And when she got to my window and I rolled it down, and she said, "Afternoon, ma'am, license and registration, please," in that flat, official voice, I felt something twist in my stomach because I knew that voice. I'd heard that voice call my son Wes in the softest tone you ever heard. Late at night in my own kitchen, 3 Christmases ago, I'd heard that voice laugh at my terrible jokes at a wedding 4 years back, when she still called me Mom instead of not calling me anything at all. It was Reagan, my daughter-in-law, my son Wesley's wife, standing there in her deputy's uniform, sunglasses hiding her eyes, looking at me like I was any stranger on any road, and not recognizing her own husband's mother sitting 3 feet away from her. Now, before I go further, sugar, let me back up, because you won't understand why that moment hit me the way it did, unless you know what came before it. Reagan and I used to be close, not just polite close, the way some in-laws manage to be for the sake of holidays and photographs, but real close. She used to call me every Sunday evening just to talk, just because she said her own mother passed when she was 19 and she liked having someone to call. She used to bring me tamales from this little stand she found in the city, because she remembered I mentioned liking them one time, in passing. She sat with me in the hospital waiting room for 6 hours when Walter had his second heart episode, holding my hand the whole while, even though Wesley had stepped out to make calls and she didn't have to stay. And then, about a year and a half ago, everything went cold. Not slow cold like a friendship fading. Fast cold, like someone flipped a switch. She stopped calling. She stopped coming to Sunday dinner, when I'd see her at family things. And there weren't many after that. She'd be polite. But it was the kind of polite you give a stranger at the pharmacy. Counter, distant, careful, like she was keeping score of something. And I was losing bad, and nobody would tell me what the game even was. I asked Wesley about it more than once. He'd get that look on his face. The look he used to get as a boy when he broke something and didn't want to say how. He'd tell me it wasn't about me, that Reagan was just going through something, that I shouldn't take it personal. But sugar, when your daughter-in-law stops looking you in the eye at your own dinner table, it is personal, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. I had my theories. I won't lie and say I didn't. I wondered if it was money. Wesley and Reagan had been saving for a house, and I know families fall out over money faster than almost anything else. I wondered if it was something I'd said Some old-fashioned comment that landed wrong, because I know I'm not always as careful with my words as the younger folks would like. I wondered, God forgive me, if there was trouble in their marriage, and she blamed me somehow for raising the man she married. I turned it over and over in my mind on lonely nights, the way you do when someone you love goes quiet on you and won't say why. So there I was on that desert road, looking up at my own daughter-in-law through my car window, and she genuinely did not recognize me. And I understood why in that first second. The sun was low and hard behind me. My scarf was covering half my hair. I had on my big drugstore sunglasses, and she'd been trained, I imagine, to look at a face fast and process it as a stranger unless it clicked right away. It didn't click. Not yet. License and registration, ma'am, she said again. A little more clipped this time because I hadn't moved. Now here is where things got complicated, sugar. And I need you to understand my state of mind, because what I did next, I did without thinking it through. The way you do things sometimes when your heart is doing more driving than your head. My purse was on the passenger seat, and in it, in the little zip pocket where I keep my driver's license, I also keep something else. Something I carry with me every single day since Walter passed, not because I need it for anything practical, but because it makes me feel close to him. It's not my ID, it's his. His old military identification card, laminated, the edges soft and worn from 30 years of handling. His photograph on it, young and serious in that way. Boys were serious in his generation, before selfies and smiling for cameras got popular. I don't rightly know what happened in my hands in that moment. Nerves, maybe. The shock of seeing her, the shock of her not seeing me. My fingers found the wrong card in that little zip pocket, and instead of handing her my driver's license, I handed her Walter's old military ID. She took it without looking up at first, the way officers do, already reaching for her little book to write in. And then she looked down at what was actually in her hand. I watched her go still. Not just quiet still, still like a held breath, still like the whole desert around us had stopped breathing too. Her jaw tightened. And her hand, I saw it, sugar. Plain as day. Her hand that was holding that laminated card started to shake. Just a little, just enough that the card trembled against her fingers. She looked up at me then, slow, and for the first time she took off her sunglasses, and I saw her eyes. I have known that girl for going on 6 years, and I have never, not once, seen her look at me the way she looked at me in that moment. It wasn't recognition, not exactly, not yet. It was something rawer than that, something that looked almost like fear, mixed up with grief, mixed up with something I can only call guilt. Sitting there, plain on her face in the middle of a desert road with the heat shimmering around us and my hand still resting on the window frame. "Where?" she said, and her voice wasn't the flat cop voice anymore. It had gone thin and unsteady. "Where did you get this?" And that's when I took off my own sunglasses. "Reagan, honey," I said. "It's Loretta." I watched the recognition hit her like a physical thing. Her whole body seemed to rock back half a step, even though her boots didn't move an inch. The military ID slipped from her fingers. She caught it before it hit the dirt, fumbling, and when she straightened back up, there were tears standing in her eyes, right there in broad daylight, in her uniform, on duty, in front of God and the highway department and whoever might drive by. "Mom," she said. And then, like the word cost her something, like it had been sitting locked up in her chest for a year and a half and finally broke loose. "Oh my God, Mom!" Now, sugar, I want to tell you I threw the car, door open right then, and pulled her into my arms, and everything got fixed. In that one beautiful desert moment, the way it might happen in a movie. But that is not how life works, and it is not how this story goes. Because in that same instant, standing there with tears in her eyes and my husband's old military ID trembling in her hand, Reagan Mercer. That was her name before she married my Wesley. Looked like a woman who had just seen a ghost. And in a manner of speaking, sugar, she had. Because what I did not know yet, sitting in my old Buick on that desert shoulder, was that Walter's military ID wasn't just a keepsake to me. It was tangled up in the very reason Reagan had gone cold on our whole family a year and a half before. It was tied to a secret nobody had told me, a secret that had been eating my daughter-in-law alive from the inside for 18 months, a secret that had made her stop calling me on Sundays and stop looking me in the eye at dinner and stop being the girl who brought me tamales because she remembered a passing comment. I did not know it yet, but I was about to find out. And sugar, when I tell you my whole understanding of my family turned over, like a car flipping on black ice. I mean that with my whole heart. Reagan, I said again, softer this time, because something in her face was scaring me now. What is it? What's wrong, honey? She looked down the empty desert road, both directions, the way officers do when they're deciding whether they're about to do something outside procedure. Then she looked back at me, and she said the words that split my whole afternoon open like a ripe melon. Mom, I need you to pull off the road up ahead at the rest stop by mile marker 11. I need you to follow me there. And I need to tell you something I should have told you 18 months ago. Something about Walter. Something about what really happened. Now, sugar, when a person tells you they need to tell you something about your dead husband that you don't already know, your heart does not sit calm in your chest. Mine surely didn't. I nodded, because I could not find my voice right then, and I watched her walk back to her cruiser on legs that did not look entirely steady, and I followed her taillights 3 miles up that lonesome desert road to a little rest stop with one picnic table and a rusted water fountain that hasn't worked since I can remember, wondering with every mile what in the Lord's name my daughter-in-law was about to tell me. When I pulled into that rest stop, Reagan was already out of her cruiser, standing by the picnic table with her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, even though it had to be 95 degrees out there with not a cloud in the sky. I parked my Buick, took a breath that didn't do much good, and walked over to her on legs that felt like they belonged to somebody else. Sit down, Mom, she said, and pointed at the bench across from her. I sat. The metal was hot through my slacks, but I didn't care one bit. Reagan, you're scaring me, I said. Just tell me. Whatever it is, just say it plain. She looked down at Walter's military ID, still in her hand, turning it over once, twice, like she was trying to find the courage inside the plastic laminate itself. Then she set it on the picnic table between us. Careful, like it was something that might break. 18 months ago, she said, I was working a financial crimes case. Nothing to do with our family at first. A tip came through about irregular activity in some veterans' survivor benefit accounts, funds moving in patterns that didn't match normal withdrawals. My job was to pull records, cross-reference account numbers, look for a pattern of fraud. Standard stuff. I've done a dozen cases like it. I nodded, though truthfully my heart was already starting to pound, because I could feel where this was heading the way you feel a storm coming before the sky even changes color. One of the accounts I pulled, Reagan said, and her voice cracked right there, was yours. The desert went very quiet in my ears just then, sugar. I heard the wind moving through the scrub brush. I heard a truck far off on the highway, but everything sounded like it was underwater. My account, I said. Reagan, what are you talking about? Your survivor benefits. Mom, the ones you get from Dad's, from Walter's, 31 years of service. I found withdrawals, small ones at first, easy to miss if you weren't looking hard. A few $100 here, a few hundred there, going back almost 3 years. Then bigger ones. Then a joint account had been opened using Walter's identification, a scanned copy of his old military ID, the same one right there on this table as secondary verification. Someone had used your husband's identity after he passed to open financial accounts and route money out of your benefits. I sat there, sugar, and I want to tell you my mind went to 100 places at once. I thought about Grady Pierce, who has managed my finances since Walter died, who sits across from me at my own kitchen table twice a year with his leather folder and his kind smile, going through my statements line by line, telling me not to worry my head about the details, that he'd handle it all for me. Grady Pierce, who was Walter's army buddy for near on 20 years before Walter passed. Grady Pierce, who cried at Walter's funeral harder than some of our own family did. Grady Pierce, who got Wesley his job at the insurance firm 4 years back, who Wesley calls Uncle Grady, though there's no blood between us at all. Reagan, I said, and my voice came out smaller than I meant it to. Who did this? She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind her eyes. The same war I imagined had been happening behind them for 18 long months. I couldn't prove it right away, she said. The account was opened under an LLC, a shell company registered to an address that didn't exist. It took me months just to trace the money to a real person, working it in whatever spare hours I had outside my regular caseload, because the second I opened an official file, the second I brought it to my captain, it would have gone through channels, and channels move slow and channels leak. Mom, cases like this get talked about in break rooms. I was scared that if word got out too early, whoever was doing this would just close the accounts, cover their tracks, and we'd never see a dime of it back. And we'd never know for sure who it even was. So what did you do? I built the case myself, quietly, on my own time. I pulled bank records through proper subpoenas, but I filed them under a general fraud sweep so nobody would connect it to you specifically. I tracked the shell company back through 3 layers of paperwork to a business account. And Mom? Her voice broke clean in half right there, and she had to stop and press the back of her hand against her mouth for a second before she could keep going. Mom, the business account belonged to Grady Pierce. Now, Sugar, I want to tell you that I gasped, or cried out, or knocked the picnic table over in my fury, the way you'd see in a movie. But that is not what happened. What happened is I went very still, the same kind of still I'd watched come over Reagan's face back on the road. Because some part of me, some deep old wounded part of me, was not entirely surprised. I had noticed things over the years, small things. A new truck Grady bought 2 years back that seemed a stretch for a man in his line of work. A vacation to the coast he mentioned once, and then never brought up again, like he regretted letting it slip. The way he'd sometimes get twitchy going through certain lines of my statements, moving his finger past them quick, saying nothing to worry about there, just fees. I had noticed, and I had trusted him anyway, because trusting Grady Pierce felt like trusting a piece of Walter himself. And I did not want to look too hard at a man who had loved my husband like a brother. How much? I asked, and my voice sounded like gravel in my own ears. How much did he take? Reagan reached into the inside pocket of her uniform jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases like she'd taken it out and looked at it more times than she could count. She unfolded it and set it on the table next to Walter's ID. As of this morning, near as I've been able to trace, she said, just over $162,000, Mom, over 3 years. Skimmed a little at a time so it wouldn't trip any red flags on your statements. Moved into an LLC he uses for what looks like a legitimate side investment business. But really, it's just been funding a whole second life. A condo down at the coast, a boat, payments on a truck that's registered to his nephew so it wouldn't show up under his own name. I sat there with that number ringing in my ears, Sugar. $162,000. Walter's whole career, 31 years of him missing, birthdays and Christmases and 1 whole year straight overseas when Wesley was just a baby. 31 years of him coming home with that faraway look in his eyes. Some seasons and needing quiet, needing me to just sit with him and not ask questions. All of that service, all of that sacrifice, turned into a number on a government check that was supposed to take care of me in my old age. And a man who called himself family had been quietly bleeding it dry for 3 years, one careful cut at a time, betting correctly that an old woman wouldn't look too close at her own bank statements, because she trusted him with her whole heart. Why didn't you tell me? I said. Reagan, honey, why in God's name didn't you just tell me? I'd have believed you. I'd have believed you over him in a heartbeat if you'd have just come to me. And this, Sugar, this is where she finally broke all the way down, right there at that rusted picnic table with the desert wind blowing, dust across both our shoes. Because Wesley works for him, she said, the words tumbling out fast now, like a dam had given way. Because Grady got Wes his job. Grady's been talking about making Wes partner within the next 2 years. Grady is at every holiday, every birthday. He's the closest thing your family has to another brother for you, Mom, and if I came to you with an accusation I couldn't fully prove yet, and I was wrong, or even if I was right but couldn't make it stick in court because the paper trail wasn't tight enough, I would have blown up this whole family for nothing. I would have made you doubt a man you love, put Wes's career at risk, and maybe let Grady walk free anyway because we tipped our hand too soon. I needed it airtight. I needed it undeniable. So I pulled back from everybody. I stopped calling you on Sundays because I was terrified I'd slip and say something. I stopped coming to dinner because I couldn't sit across from Grady, Pierce with a fork in my hand, knowing what I knew, and pretend to laugh at his jokes. I know it looked like I stopped loving you, Mom. I know that's what it looked like. But I swear to you, every single Sunday I didn't call, I was thinking about you. Every single dinner I missed, it was because I was out in a parking lot somewhere at 8 o'clock at night, cross-referencing bank statements by the light of my phone, trying to build a case strong enough that this man could never hurt you again. I did not say anything for a long moment, Sugar. I sat there with the dessert, wind on my face, and Walter's old military ID sitting on that picnic table between us like a silent witness to everything, and I let it all wash over me. The betrayal from a man I'd trusted like family, and the strange, aching relief of understanding that the daughter-in-law I loved had not stopped loving me at all. She had been carrying this alone, in silence for a year and a half, protecting me the only way she knew how, and paying for it with her own peace of mind every single day. "Show me the file," I finally said. "Show me everything you've got, Reagan. Every last page." She looked at me with something like shock. "Mom, I'm not supposed to—" "Reagan Mercer," I said. "And I want you to know, Sugar, I have not used that tone of voice since Wesley was 17 years old and came home smelling like somebody else's cigarettes. That money is mine. That betrayal is mine. And I have earned the right to see exactly how deep it goes before one more day passes. Now show me." And so, right there at that rest stop by mile marker 11, with the sun starting its long, slow slide toward the western hills, my daughter-in-law spread 18 months of careful, secret, heartbroken detective work across a rusted picnic table, and I began to understand exactly how much I had been betrayed, and exactly how much I had been loved all along by a woman I'd spent a year and a half believing had simply stopped caring. We sat at that picnic table for the better part of an hour, Sugar going through page after page, bank statements with little red circles where Reagan had marked the suspicious transfers, screenshots of shell company registration documents, a photograph, grainy but clear enough, of Grady's boat down at the coast, the one he'd never once mentioned to me in 6 years of managing my money and calling himself family. By the time the sun had dropped low enough to turn the whole dessert the color of a fresh bruise, I understood the shape of what had been done to me, and I understood the shape of what my daughter-in-law had sacrificed to uncover it. "We have to tell Wesley," I said finally, folding my hands together the way I do when I'm trying to keep them from shaking. "Tonight, before this goes one more day." Reagan's face went tight with worry. "Mom, I don't know how he's going to take this. Grady's like a father to him, more than his own." She stopped herself, but I knew what she'd almost said, and she wasn't wrong to almost say it. Walter was a good man and a good father when he was home, but the army took him away for long stretches, and it was Grady who taught my son to change a tire, Grady who showed up to his Little League games some seasons more than Walter's own duty schedule allowed, Grady who walked him through filling out his first job application. My son loved that man, loves him still, I imagine, even now, even after. "I know," I said, "but he deserves the truth same as I did, same as you've been carrying it alone too long. Reagan, it's time this family carries it together." We drove back to my house separately, her cruiser trailing my old Buick down that darkening desert road. And I called Wesley from my kitchen while Reagan waited in my living room, still in her uniform, twisting her hands together on my old, flowered couch like a woman waiting for a verdict. Wesley came over within the half hour, still in his work clothes, tie loosened, looking confused and a little annoyed the way a grown man looks when his mother calls him with a voice that won't explain itself over the phone. He walked in, saw Reagan sitting there, saw the folder of papers spread across my kitchen table, and I watched something cautious cross his face. "What's going on?" he said. "Reagan, why are you still in uniform? Is everything okay?" "Sit down, son," I told him, and he sat, because even at 38 years old, some tones a mother uses still land the same way they did when he was 8. "I want to tell you honestly." Sugar, watching my son's face as Reagan walked him through 18 months of evidence, was one of the hardest things I have witnessed in my whole life, harder in some ways than watching Walter's casket lowered into the ground, because grief for the dead is a clean kind of pain, and this was not clean at all. This was watching a grown man's whole understanding of a person he loved crumble in real time, piece by piece, page by page. "No," he kept saying at first. "No, there's some mistake. This has to be some kind of mistake. Grady wouldn't." "Reagan, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure this isn't some coincidence, some clerical thing?" "I'm sure, Wes," Reagan said, gentle but firm, the way you'd talk a person down off a ledge. "I've been sure for months. I just didn't know how to tell you without it costing you everything. Your job, your mentor, The only man besides your dad who ever showed up for you the way a father should. Wesley put his head in his hands right there at my kitchen table, Sugar, and I watched my 38-year-old son's shoulders shake, the way they hadn't shaken since he was a boy of 9, crying over a dog we'd had to put down. I got up and put my hand on his back the way I used to, and I didn't say anything for a long while, because sometimes there is nothing to say. There is only the sitting with a person while the ground shifts underneath them. He took from you, Wesley finally said, lifting his head, looking at me with red eyes. Mom, he took from you and I brought him to every dinner. I gave him a key to my apartment when we go on vacation. I let my kids call him Uncle Grady, and here his voice cracked something awful. I let him hold Emma when she was 2 days old. Mom, I trusted that man with my daughter. I know, baby, I said. I trusted him too. That's what men like Grady count on. They don't steal from strangers. Strangers watch their wallets. They steal from the people who love them too much to look too close. We sat with that a long while, the three of us, the kitchen clock ticking loud in the quiet, the way clocks only seem to do at the worst moments of your life. And then, Sugar, something happened that I did not expect, and it is the thing I want you to remember most about this whole story, because it is the hinge that everything else turned on. Wesley reached across my kitchen table and took Reagan's hand. You did this alone, he said. For 18 months, you carried this by yourself so you could protect my mother, protect me, protect this whole family from a mistake you couldn't be sure you weren't making. And I let myself get so caught up feeling hurt that my wife had gone quiet on me. I never once thought to ask what might be happening behind her silence. I'm sorry, Rhea. God, I'm so sorry. Reagan started crying then, really crying. The kind of crying that comes up out of a person from somewhere very deep and very tired. 18 months of held breath finally letting go all at once. And I got up from my chair slow, because my knees aren't what they used to be. And I walked around that table and I put my arms around my daughter-in-law for the first time in a year and a half, and I felt her shaking against me like a leaf in a hard wind. I thought you hated me, I whispered into her hair. I thought I'd done something, said something. I laid awake so many nights trying to figure out what I did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, she said into my shoulder. You did everything right. You just loved a man who didn't deserve the trust you gave him, and I was too scared of losing everything to tell you sooner. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Hush now, I said, the way I used to say to Wesley when he was small and scraped his knee. Hush now, Sugar. We've got each other back. That's the part that matters tonight. But Sugar, even as I held that girl in my kitchen, even as some deep wound in my chest that had been open for 18 months finally started to close, another part of me, an older, harder part, the part of me that spent 31 years married to a soldier and learned a thing or two about what it means to stand your ground, was already turning something else over in my mind. Because loving Grady Pierce like family did not mean I had to let him keep what he'd stolen from a dead soldier's widow. Reconciliation with my family was one thing, and it had come to me faster and easier than I'd ever dared hope. But justice for Walter, justice for every quiet Sunday. I'd sat wondering why my daughter-in-law had stopped calling. Justice for $162,000 carved out of my husband's 31 years of service. One careful cut at a time. That was a different matter altogether, and I intended to see it through. Reagan, I said, pulling back and wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. What do we need to do to finish this the right way? The legal way. I want that file airtight. I want that man to answer for every dollar. She looked up at me, and something like fierce pride came into her face, wet-eyed as she was. Mom, if you're willing, I think we finally have enough. But I need you to do something for me. Something that might not be easy. Tell me. I need you to sit down with him one more time, she said. Like nothing's wrong. Let him think everything's still the way it's always been. Just one more meeting, one more time going over your statements at your kitchen table, the way you've done for 6 years. And I need you to wear a wire. Now, Sugar, I want you to understand. 74 years old, and I had never worn a wire in my whole life. I had never done one single thing more dangerous than driving myself to church in a light rain. But I looked at Reagan's face, and I looked at Wesley's face, still red and raw from crying at my kitchen table, and I thought about Walter, about the young man in that laminated photograph, 22 years old and solemn and proud, signing his name to 31 years of service to a country that promised to take care of the woman he left behind. And I thought about Grady Pierce, sitting in my kitchen twice a year, with his leather folder, patting my hand and telling me not to worry my head about the details. "I'll do it," I said. "Tell me what I need to do." It took 4 more days to set everything up proper. Reagan brought in her captain, a serious, quiet man named Sergeant Alvarez, who Reagan told me had been with the department 11 years and had a reputation for being careful, thorough, the kind of officer who didn't move on a case until every piece was locked down tight. He came to my house on a Thursday evening, sat at my kitchen table where Grady usually sat, and walked me through it all, what I could and couldn't say, how the recording device would sit against my chest under my blouse, how Reagan and 2 other officers would be parked down the road in an unmarked car, close enough to hear everything, close enough to come running if anything went sideways. "Mrs. Adair," Sergeant Alvarez said to me, "and here I'll tell you. Sugar, in this story I go by Loretta Adair. That was my name, Walter's name, the name I'd carried proud for near on 50 years. You don't have to do this. We have a strong case already. It would just be stronger and faster with a clean confession on tape." "I understand," I told him. "I want to do it." That man sat across from my grief for 6 years and smiled at me while he was robbing my husband's memory blind. I think I've earned the right to look him in the eye one more time before this is done. Reagan squeezed my hand under the table. I could see the worry still sitting in her, but I could see something else too. Respect, maybe, or pride. The same look I imagine I used to give her, mother-in-law to daughter-in-law, back before everything went cold, back when she was still the girl bringing me tamales because she remembered a passing comment. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. Tuesday again. Sugar, isn't that something? The same day of the week it all started, at 2 in the afternoon. My regular time with Grady, nothing out of the ordinary, just Loretta Adair going over her quarterly statements, the way she'd done twice a year for 6 long years. I will tell you, Sugar, that Tuesday morning I woke up before my alarm, before the sun even, and I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling with my heart going like a rabbit's. I got up and I went to my dresser and I took out Walter's photograph, the good one, the one from his retirement ceremony, 31 years of service, standing straight and proud in his dress, uniform with more ribbons than I ever fully learned the meaning of. And I sat on the edge of my bed and I talked to him a while, the way I do sometimes when the house gets too quiet. "I'm going to fix this," I told his picture. "I'm going to make sure the man who did this to us answers for it. But Walter, honey, I don't know if I've got room in my heart for hate on top of everything else I'm already carrying. I don't know what that's going to look like yet. I guess we'll find out together." Grady arrived right on time, the way he always did, driving that truck registered to nobody knew until Reagan traced it, carrying his leather folder under one arm and a box of the little lemon cookies I like from the bakery on 5th Street, the same kind he'd brought me every single visit for 6 years, like a man who genuinely cared whether an old widow had something sweet to go with her coffee. "Loretta," he said, coming through my front door with that same warm smile he'd worn at Walter's funeral. "You're looking well, Sugar. How's that hip been treating you?" "Oh, it comes and goes." "Grady," I said, "and Sugar, I want you to know," keeping my voice light and easy while that man stood in my kitchen with a device taped against my chest recording every word. Knowing what I knew about him, that was harder than anything I'd done since Walter's funeral itself. "Sit on down, I've got coffee going." We went through the small talk the way we always did, his sister's grandbabies, the weather, a church picnic coming up that neither of us was much looking forward to. And then the way he always did, he opened that leather folder and spread my quarterly statement across my kitchen table, running his finger down the columns, murmuring numbers under his breath. And I watched his hand, the same hand that had shaken mine at Walter's graveside, the same hand that had patted my shoulder more times than I could count, telling me everything would be all right, moving down that page like it belonged there, like he had every right in the world to be sitting in my kitchen, managing money he'd been quietly bleeding for 3 straight years. "Everything looks steady, Loretta," he said. "Your benefits are coming through regular. Your little cushion account is holding nice and stable. Nothing much to report this quarter." "Is that so?" I said, "and I want you to know, Sugar." Something in my voice must have shifted just slightly, because Grady looked up at me for half a second longer than the moment called for. "Funny thing, Grady, I had my daughter-in-law take a look at some of my statements recently. She's a police officer, you know. Deputy over in Pale Rock Crossing. I watched it happen, Sugar. I watched the color start to drain out of that man's face. Slow at first, like watching a bathtub empty. His hand, still resting on my statement, went very still. "That's so," he said, and his voice had a careful lightness to it now. The kind of lightness a man puts on when he's trying hard not to sound afraid. What did she have to say? She had quite a lot to say, Grady, I said, and I looked him dead in the eye. The way Walter taught me to look a man in the eye when you mean business. Back when we were young, and he was teaching me things about the world I hadn't known before I married a soldier. She had quite a lot to say about a shell company, about a boat down at the coast, about a truck registered to your nephew so it wouldn't show up under your own name, about $162,000, Grady, carved out of my husband's 31 years of service, one careful cut at a time, by a man who sat at Walter's own graveside and cried like he'd lost a brother. Grady Pierce sat very still at my kitchen table for what felt like a long, long time, Sugar. And then slow, he closed that leather folder, and he looked up at me, and I saw something break loose in his face. Not quite confession. Not yet, but something close to it. Something like a dam that's held too long finally starting to give. "Loretta," he said quiet, "I never meant for it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go, Grady?" I asked, and I kept my voice level, though my heart was pounding so hard. I thought surely he could see my blouse moving with it. How far is far enough when you're stealing from a dead man's widow? And that, Sugar, is when Grady Pierce told me everything. The gambling debts that started, small 5 years back, and grew into something he couldn't climb out of. The loan sharks he'd gotten tangled with trying to cover one bad bet with another. The shame that kept him from ever telling Wesley or asking for honest help. The terrible, slow-building logic of a desperate man who told himself that first time it was just a little, just enough to cover one payment, and he'd pay it back before I ever noticed, and then never did pay it back at all, because that is how it always goes with men like that. One small lie compounding into another, until the whole structure is rotten clean through. "I'm sorry," he kept saying over and over, tears standing in his own eyes now. "Loretta, I am so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you like family. I loved Walter like a brother." "You don't get to say that to me," I said, and my voice finally broke. Sugar, right there at my own kitchen table. 6 years of trust and 31 years of Walter's service, all wrapped up in one terrible morning. You don't get to love somebody like family and then rob them, blind for 3 years, and smile at their face twice a year telling them everything's steady. That is not love, Grady. That is theft wearing love's clothes. The front door opened then, and Reagan came through first in her uniform, followed by Sergeant Alvarez and another officer, and I watched Grady Pierce's shoulders drop, watched all the fight go out of a man who had spent 3 years so carefully, covering his tracks, finally caught, finally out of road to run down. "Gerald Pierce," Sergeant Alvarez said, "official and even, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and theft by deception." They read him his rights right there in my kitchen. Sugar, with the smell of coffee still in the air and a half-eaten box of lemon cookies sitting on my counter, and I sat at my own table and watched a man I'd trusted like family get handcuffed and led out my front door, and I did not feel triumphant, the way I thought I might. I felt tired clean down to my bones. Reagan stayed behind after the other officers took Grady out to the car. She sat down across from me at that kitchen table, still in her uniform, and reached over to take my hand. "You did good, Mom," she said. "That confession, on tape, clean as anything I've ever heard. There's no way a defense attorney talks his way out of that. You just made sure he can't hurt another family the way he hurt ours." I nodded, but I'll tell you, Sugar, my mind wasn't fully in that kitchen anymore. It had drifted somewhere else, back to Walter's funeral, 6 years gone now, and Grady Pierce standing at the graveside in his good dark suit, weeping into a handkerchief, telling me afterward that Walter had been the best friend a man could ask for, that he'd make sure I never wanted for anything as long as he had breath in his body. I thought about how many Christmases he'd sat at my table since, how many times he'd fixed my porch, light or driven me to the doctor when my hip was acting up and Wesley couldn't get away from work. How much of what I'd believed about that man had been real, at least at first, before whatever desperation crept in and turned it rotten. "What happens now?" I asked Reagan. "Now it goes to the district attorney," she said. With a confession like that, plus the paper trail I built, he's looking at serious time. Restitution, too. The court can order him to pay back what he took. Though realistically, Mom, a lot of it's already spent. The boat, the truck, that condo down at the coast, those might get seized and sold to help cover what's owed you. But I won't lie to you and tell you you're getting every dollar back. Some of it's just gone. I sat with that a moment. $162,000, some of it just gone. Turned into a boat some other family would probably buy secondhand at auction one day, never knowing the story stitched into its hull. I don't much care about the money anymore, I said, surprising myself as much as I think I surprised her. I mean, I care, Sugar, don't misunderstand me. That money matters, and I intend to see whatever can be recovered. But sitting here right now, what I keep thinking about isn't the dollars. It's the 6 years. 6 years of trusting a man with pieces of Walter's memory. 6 years of him sitting right there where you're sitting now. And the whole time, some part of him was lying to my face. That's the theft that cuts deepest, Reagan. Not the money. The lie. Reagan didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said quiet, "Are you going to hate him?" Now, Sugar, that is a question I turned over in my mind for a long time in the weeks that followed, through the arraignment, through the preliminary hearings, through all the slow grinding machinery of the justice system that Reagan had warned me would take months, maybe longer. I sat in a courtroom 3 separate times and watched Grady Pierce, no longer in his good suits, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller and older than the man who used to bring me lemon cookies, plead first not guilty, and then eventually, once his own lawyer saw the strength of the evidence stacked against him, guilty to every charge. The judge sentenced him to 7 years, with the possibility of parole after 4, and ordered restitution to the fullest extent the seized assets could cover, which Reagan estimated would come to somewhere near $90,000 once the boat and truck and condo were all sold off. Not the full amount, not close to it, but more than I ever expected to see again. I want to tell you something now, Sugar. Something that surprised even me. Something I did not plan and did not expect, and could not have told you I would do right up until the moment I actually did it. After the sentencing, after the courtroom emptied out and the bailiffs began leading Grady back toward the door that goes to wherever they take men in his position, I stood up from my seat in the gallery, and I asked the bailiff if I might have 1 minute, just 1 minute, to speak to the man who stole from my husband's memory for 3 years and called it love the whole while. They let me. I don't know if they're supposed to, but Sergeant Alvarez was there, and I think he had a word with somebody, and they let me stand a few feet from Grady Pierce in that quiet, echoing courtroom with just Wesley and Reagan and 1 bailiff standing by. Grady would not look at me at first. He stood with his head down, hands cuffed in front of him, and I watched his shoulders shake a little, and I understood that whatever else that man was, he was also deeply, thoroughly ashamed, in a way that goes beyond simply getting caught. "Grady," I said, "look at me." He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face older than I'd ever seen it. 6 years of careful smiling worn clean away, and underneath it just a tired, frightened, guilty man who had let 1 bad decision compound into 100 worse ones. "I am not going to tell you I forgive what you did," I said, and my voice was steady, Sugar, steadier than I expected it to be. "What you did to me, to Walter's memory, to this family, that is going to take me a long time to sit right with, if I ever fully do. You do not get to walk away from 3 years of lies with 1 apology and expect the slate wiped clean. That is not how it works, and any preacher worth his collar would tell you the same." He nodded, small, tears running down into the collar of that orange jumpsuit. "But," I said, "and here, Sugar, is where something in my own chest shifted, something I had not planned to say until the words were already leaving my mouth. I am also not going to spend whatever years I have left carrying hate for you around like a stone in my pocket. Walter served this country 31 years so that people like you and me could live free. And part of living free, the way I understand it, is not letting a man like you rent space in my heart for the rest of my days. So here's what I'm going to do, Grady Pierce. I am going to let the courts handle what you owe this family in dollars and in years. That part is not mine to forgive or hold on to. That is between you and the law now. But the part that is mine, the anger, the betrayal, the 6 years of trust you spent, I am going to set that down. Not for your sake, for mine. Because I buried a husband once already, and I am not about to spend my remaining years burying myself alive in bitterness over a man who was never worth the space you're about to take up in a cell. I turned then, sugar, and I did not wait to see whatever look crossed his face, because it was not for me to carry anymore. I walked out of that courtroom on the arm of my son and my daughter-in-law, and I felt lighter than I had felt in a year and a half, lighter than I had felt, if I am honest, in 6 long years of quietly worrying whether I was managing my late husband's legacy right. Now, sugar, I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that everything wrapped up neat as a bow the very same week. But real life doesn't work quite that tidy, and I promised you a true telling, not a fairy tale. It took the better part of that whole year for the restitution to actually come through, piece by piece. As the court sold off what could be sold, the boat went first, then the truck, then eventually the little coastal condo, and slow as molasses in January, money started trickling back into an account Reagan helped me set up properly this time, with a real bank, with statements I now read line by line myself every single month. Glasses on, coffee in hand, not because I don't trust anybody anymore, but because I promised myself I would never again hand my whole understanding of my own life over to somebody else's leather folder. But sugar, here is the part of this story that matters more than any dollar amount, more than any sentencing or restitution schedule, and it's the part I think about most on quiet evenings now, sitting on my porch with the desert going purple at the edges as the sun goes down. Reagan started coming to Sunday dinner again. First week after the sentencing, she showed up at my door, not in her uniform, but in a soft yellow sundress, carrying a paper bag from that same little tamale stand she used to frequent. And when I opened the door and saw her standing there, sugar, I could not get a single word out past the lump in my throat. She just held up the bag and said, "I remembered you liked these." And I pulled her into my arms right there on my front porch, and we both cried like a couple of fools in front of God and the whole neighborhood. Wesley and Reagan have a standing Sunday dinner with me now, same as they used to, 4 years running before everything went sideways. And their 2 children, my grandbabies, Emma, who's 5 now, and little Theo, who just turned 3, come tearing through my house every week like a pair of small tornadoes. And I let them, sugar, because a house needs noise like that in it, needs small feet running across old floors, needs the sound of a family that chose to stay whole even after it nearly broke clean in half. Reagan and I talk every Sunday evening again, too, just like before. And sometimes now, our conversations drift to things we never used to discuss. She tells me a little about her cases, careful about what she can and can't share. And I tell her things about Walter I never got around to telling anybody. Stories from our early marriage, from the long, lonely years when he was overseas and I was raising Wesley near alone in a little rented house 2 states over from any family, learning what it meant to hold a household together on faith and hope and not much else. I think, in a strange way, this whole terrible ordeal gave us something we never quite had before, not just forgiveness for the silence, but a deeper honesty than we'd built in all our years of easier, lighter conversation. Wesley took it hardest in some ways, longer than either Reagan or I did. He struggled for months with the shape of Grady's betrayal, especially the part where his own daughter had sat on that man's knee, had called him uncle, had trusted him the uncomplicated way small children trust the adults who show up smiling. He went to see a counselor for a spell, something he'd never done in his whole life. Proud man that he is, and I think it did him good, taught him that loving somebody who turns out to have deceived you doesn't make you foolish. It just makes you human, the same as it made me human, the same as it makes every one of us who's ever trusted somebody who didn't deserve it. I think about that military ID a lot these days, sugar. It sits back in the little zip pocket of my purse where it sat for 6 years. And I still take it out sometimes. Still run my thumb over Walter's young, solemn face in that photograph. Still feel close to him the same way I always have. But it means something different to me now than it did before that. Tuesday on the desert road, it's not just a keepsake of a man I loved and lost. It's the thing that cracked a secret wide open. The thing that stopped my daughter-in-law, cold in her tracks on a hot afternoon, and forced the truth up out of the ground, where it had been buried for 18 long months. Walter, in his own strange way, reached out from beyond his own passing and helped set this whole family right again. And I don't know if I believe that in some mystical sense, or if I just believe it because it's a comfort to believe it. But either way, sugar, I hold on to it, the same way I hold on to that laminated card. Grady wrote me a letter about 8 months into his sentence. I almost didn't open it. Sat with that envelope on my kitchen table for near on a week before. I worked up whatever it took to slit it open. It wasn't long, Sugar. Just a page, his handwriting shakier than I remembered it, and in it he told me about the gambling, about how it started with a friendly poker game and grew into something he couldn't outrun, about the shame that kept him lying long after he knew he should have stopped, about how he thinks about Walter every single day he sits in that cell and cannot forgive himself, whether or not I ever managed to. I wrote him back one time. Just a few lines. I told him what I told him in that courtroom, that I wasn't carrying hate for him, that I'd set that particular stone down and did not intend to pick it back up, but that setting it down didn't mean pretending the ground beneath it wasn't scorched. I told him I hoped whenever he did finish his time, he found some way to make something decent out of whatever years he had left, not for my sake, not to earn back anything, but because that's what a wasted life deserves, a chance to stop being wasted. I haven't written since, and I don't know that I will again, but I felt lighter having said my piece, and I think, in whatever way a broken man can feel anything lighter from behind bars, I think he did too. Now, Sugar, I know you're probably wondering how my Reagan is doing these days. Out there on patrol, and I'll tell you, she got a commendation from her department for the Pierce case, closed clean, conviction secured, restitution process underway, and more than that, she got something I don't think any award can fully capture, which is her own peace of mind back, the freedom of not carrying a secret alone anymore. She still pulls people over on that same desert road sometimes, still wears those same sunglasses that hid her eyes from me that hot Tuesday afternoon, and every single time she calls to tell me about her shift, she laughs a little and says, "No mothers-in-law today, Mom." Promise, and we both laugh because, Sugar, some jokes only get funnier the longer a family holds on to them together. I think about how close we came to losing each other over silence. 18 months of misunderstanding. 18 months of me lying awake wondering what I'd done wrong. 18 months of her carrying a burden alone that should have been carried together. And all of it could have stretched on for years, could have hardened into something neither of us ever managed to talk our way back out of. If it hadn't been for one hot Tuesday afternoon, one wrong card pulled from a purse in a moment of nerves, one military ID that froze a police officer cold in the middle of a lonely desert road and cracked a secret wide enough for the truth to finally climb out. I don't drive that road without thinking of it now, Sugar. Every single Tuesday on my way to visit Walter's grave, I pass mile marker 11 and I slow down just a little, and I say a small thank you to whatever version of my husband is listening from wherever he's gotten to, for reaching out through an old laminated card and helping stitch his family back together one more time, even from 6 years gone. Family isn't always about blood, Sugar, and it isn't always about never having secrets, or never going quiet, or never getting things wrong. Sometimes it's about what you do after the wrong thing happens. Whether you choose the hate that would feel so easy and so justified, or whether you choose to set that stone down day after day and keep choosing it, even when it's hard, even when a man who wore your husband's memory like a mask sits across from you smiling. For 6 long years before the truth comes out, I chose to forgive what could be forgiven and let the law handle what needed handling, and hold my family close through every hard conversation in between. And Sugar, I'll tell you this plain, it was the harder road, harder by far than staying angry would have been. But it's the only road that led me back to Sunday dinners with my grandbabies tearing through my kitchen, and my daughter-in-law's laugh echoing down my hallway again, and that, to me, was always worth more than any $162,000 a man like Grady Pierce could ever have taken from me. There's one more evening I want to tell you about before I close this story out, Sugar, because I think it says more about where we all ended up than any courtroom scene ever could. It was a Sunday, maybe 4 months after the sentencing. Warm evening, that kind of cold desert. Light coming low through my kitchen, window the way it does in early autumn out here. Wesley was out back grilling, badly, the way he always has, burning the corn every single time, no matter how many times I tell him to turn the flame down. Emma and little Theo were chasing each other around my yard with 2 of my old wooden spoons pretending they were swords, hollering fit to wake the dead. and Reagan was standing at my kitchen counter next to me, both of us shelling peas into a bowl, not saying much, just being together in that easy quiet that only comes back slow, after trust has been broken and mended and tested and held. "Mom," she said out of nowhere, not looking up from the peas, "can I ask you something?" "Course, sugar. Are you doing okay? Really okay? Not the answer you give everybody else. The real one." And I thought about that question a long moment, sugar, because I wanted to give her the truth same as she'd finally given me hers on that hot desert road. "Some days I still think about him," I said. "Grady, I mean, not with the anger I used to carry those first few weeks. More like you'd think about a storm that passed through and knocked some trees down. You don't hate the storm. You just remember what it cost you, and you plant new trees, and you go on." I set down the pea pod in my hand, but then I look out that window at my grandbabies swinging spoons at each other in my backyard, and I hear my son ruining perfectly good corn on that grill, and I feel you standing right here, beside me shelling peas, same as we used to before. Everything went sideways, and honestly, sugar, most days I feel like the luckiest old woman in this whole desert, because plenty of families go through something like what we went through and never find their way back to each other. We did. That's not nothing. That's everything, far as I'm concerned. Reagan didn't say anything for a moment, just reached over and squeezed my hand, still faintly smelling of pea shells and the sunscreen she'd rubbed onto Theo's nose 20 minutes before. And out back, Wesley hollered something about the corn catching fire again, and we both laughed. The easy laugh of two women who'd been through the fire themselves and come out the other side, closer than they'd started. I think about Walter watching over all of this sometimes. Sugar, in whatever way a woman my age allows herself to believe such things. I think about him proud of the family he left behind, proud that his service, even used against him by a man who should have known better, still somehow found its way to protecting the people he loved most. 31 years and 6 years gone and still standing, guard over us from wherever soldiers go when their service is finally truly done. I keep his ID in my purse still, sugar, same little zip pocket, and some Tuesdays when I drive out past mile marker 11 on my way to sit with him a while at the cemetery. I take it out at a red light and I look at that young, serious face and I say the same thing every time. "Thank you, honey. You're still watching out for us. You always were. Now, sugar, before I let you go, I want to know something. Where are you watching from tonight? Go on down there and drop your city in the comments. I read every single one of them. I truly do, sitting right here with my coffee most evenings, scrolling through and smiling at how far this old grandma's stories reach. And if this one meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own grandmother, your own hard road back to forgiveness, go on and hit that like button for me. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss the next one. And share it with somebody you love. If you love your grandma, you go on and show her this one. Tell her I said hello, and I'll see you all real soon, sugar, with another story straight from the heart.